Before he could stop himself, he bent down, pressed his lips to hers, and kissed her with the force of all the weeks of suppressed tension between them. It was intimate, heated, and consuming. Tongues brushing, breaths mingling, bodies pressing close. His hand slid over the curve of her hip, pulling her impossibly closer, while the other rested against the seat for support. She gasped into the kiss, surprised, yet responding with a hunger he hadn't anticipated. When they finally broke apart, both panting, foreheads pressed together, he whispered, voice hoarse, "God, I wanted this. I wanted you since the first day you walked into my office." Sierra's own pulse raced. She had tried to fight it, tried to stay professional, tried to maintain the barrier imposed by the Medjay contract. But in that instant, in the quiet of the car, with the city lights of Lagos streaking past, it no longer mattered. Desire had taken over, and Medjay Olisa, Africa's most eligible and controlled playboy, was completely undone. Want to know how Africa's biggest playboy, who had demanded his female employees sign a contract preventing any romantic relationship, came to fall for his financial strategist? Then follow Medjay and Sierra's story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Chidumajay Olisa, Medjay, as the entire business world knew him, strode out of the courtroom like a storm made flesh. His jaw was set, his steps harsh, the expensive Italian leather of his shoes striking the marble floor with the fury of a man who had just won, yet felt nothing like a victor. He'd won the case, but at what cost? The bright noon sun hit him, but it didn't warm the chill in his chest. His lawyers trailed behind him, whispering congratulations, but Medjay barely heard them. All he could think about was the deal slipping through his fingers, a $50 million partnership that had taken him months to secure, a deal now hanging by a thread because of this spectacle. His partner, Chief Adebanjo, was a man born from ancient tradition, stern, disciplined, a man who believed reputation was everything. And now he was questioning whether Medjay was worthy of being associated with his legacy, all because of her, Beverly, his ex-HR manager, a woman he had fired for unethical conduct that included her repeated, shameless attempts to seduce him. She wasn't the first, she wouldn't be the last. Being 37, devastatingly handsome, and Africa's most eligible bachelor had its curses. But Beverly, she was vindictive. She'd claimed wrongful termination, dragged him into court, and turned the entire ordeal into a media circus. Paparazzi were waiting by the courthouse entrance, ready to capture every twitch of his expression. Headlines were already lighting up social media. Billionaire playboy Medjay Olisa in HR scandal. Former employee accuses Olisa of misconduct. Who is the real Chidumajay Olisa? Medjay's fists clenched as he stepped onto the granite steps, each breath burning with irritation. He had to fight the urge to yank off his tie. It felt like a noose today. Funny, he'd worn the suit to win the case, and he did, but it felt like shackles now. He had built his empire with focus, discipline, and a ruthless work ethic, but for years, the world preferred to talk about his cars, his looks, and his dating life rather than his brain. At 37, he had everything: power, wealth, influence, and a bachelor status women on 3 continents found irresistible. But he also had a target on his back. This time, Beverly had fired the shot, and if he didn't six this fast, that $50 million deal would crumble before his eyes. Medjay exhaled slowly, forcing calm into his chest. He wasn't a man who bowed to chaos. He was Medjay Olisa, and he was about to remind the world why that name carried weight. Medjay paused at the foot of the courthouse steps, raising a hand as reporters swarmed like hungry bees. Cameramen jostled, microphones stretched toward him, voices clashing in a frantic chorus. "Mr. Olisa, did you fire Ms. Beverly unfairly? Is it true she accused you of harassment? Are you losing the Adebanjo deal?" He lifted his chin, calm, polished, lethal. "I'll answer only one question," he said, voice carrying authority that cut through the chaos. Silence fell instantly. Medjay continued. Beverly's claims were fabricated. The court saw that clearly. Her case was dismissed without hesitation. I terminated her for cause, unethical behavior, repeated violations of HR policy, and unprofessional advances towards me. He let his gaze sweep across the crowd, sharp as glass. And to remove any doubt, I will release the surveillance footage to the press within 24 hours. Cameras clicked wildly. My media team will provide you with all the files and statements you need. Let's put this scandal to rest. With that, he strode toward his waiting car, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, gleaming like a panther under the Lego sun. He slid in, shutting the door on the noise of the world. Peace lasted exactly 2 seconds. His phone vibrated. Mother. Medjay groaned aloud. Perfect, he muttered, rubbing his forehead. Just what I need. He answered reluctantly. Mama. Chidu Medjay. Her regal voice filled the car, warm yet unyielding. This is exactly what I've been talking about. If you had a wife, you would not be suffering this embarrassment every month. Mama, please. You are 37, she thundered. Do you want to wait until your beard is gray before you settle down? You need stability, a home, and a woman who will keep these immoral girls away from you. Medjay pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm handling it. You are not handling it well enough. Find a wife. She hung up before he could protest. He drops the phone on the seat beside him and let out a long, murderous sigh. Since he turned 27, she'd been on a mission to marry him off. 10 years later, it was practically her full-time job. Marriage. Commitment. Shackles. No thank you. He preferred freedom, the open sky, his empire, and zero romantic nonsense complicating his life. He pulled out his other phone, dialing his legal team. Draw up a new contract, he said without preamble, applicable to all female employees, especially those in close proximity to me. What should it cover, sir? His top lawyer asked. Immediate termination for violations. No pursuit of romantic relationships, not from them to me, and not from me to them. Ironclad. Immediate termination for violations. He could almost hear their shock, but they knew better than to question him. Yes, sir. We'll have the first draft ready tonight. He ended the call, satisfaction settling into his chest. Order. Peace. Control. Exactly what he needed. Finally, he dialed Chief Adebanjo. The call rang. And rang. Then the chief's secretary answered, her tone clipped, brittle, strained. Good afternoon, Mr. Olisa. Good afternoon. I need to speak with the chief. A pause. Too long. I'm afraid the chief is unavailable. Her voice held no warmth, no respect, certainly no assurance. Medjay felt his stomach drop with the unmistakable chill of trouble. This scandal wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Medjay leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on the polished mahogany desk as he scanned through the final stack of profiles. His schedule was a war zone, his mind already stretched thin, expansion plans, shifting market trends, the endless chaos left in the wake of the Beverly scandal, and now the crushing disappointment of losing the Adebanjo deal. He exhaled sharply. Focus. He flipped to the last file. And stopped. This one was different. Clean, precise, impressive enough to make even him straighten in his seat. Sierra Nduka, 26, head of a boutique financial strategy. Firm with only 3 employees. Lean, efficient, aggressively productive. Her numbers were flawless. Her predictions accurate. Her past clients singing praises that were both effusive and jealous. Ambition sharpened every line of her resume. Medjay's brow lifted. Young, unusually young for this level of performance. But competence didn't scare him. He admired it, even courted it. And at this stage of expansion, he needed brilliance. He needed new angles, fresh eyes, someone bold enough to challenge him and clever enough to elevate his empire. Ego aside, he wasn't foolish enough to think he always had the best ideas. Besides, Elisa Holdings was growing so rapidly that even he could no longer single-handedly predict every market curve. Africa, Dubai, Singapore, Berlin. He needed a strategist who could thread all his global ventures into something cohesive and profitable. "This is the one," he muttered to himself. He didn't hesitate. "Have my lawyers prep the onboarding documents and add the Meije contract." His PA blinked. "For a consultant too, sir?" "Especially for a consultant," he replied. "No loopholes." It had been months since Beverly dragged him into court, months since he'd beaten the case cleanly, and yet the fallout lingered. Rumors, misinterpretations, deals evaporating. Chief Adebanjo's loss still stung like a slap he hadn't seen coming. After that mess, he made sure every female employee signed the stringent, infamous document his HR team now jokingly called the Meije contract. Everyone, from the female CFOs to the receptionists. The only exceptions were the cleaners and office assistants, women who never crossed into his direct sphere. No blurred lines, no accusations, no scandals, no weaknesses. Across town, in Sierra's minimalist office lined with books and whiteboards crammed with market analyses, she skimmed through an email attachment, a PDF titled Elisa Holdings, Employee and Contractor Conduct Policy, Restricted. She frowned, opened it, and froze. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with a heat that rose like fire up her neck. What is this? Her assistant peeked over her shoulder. "Oh, is that the Meije contract?" Sierra hissed. She pushed to her feet. Unbelievable! She'd heard rumors. Everyone in the corporate world had. Stories of how the billionaire playboy had created a draconian anti-romance policy that forbade female staff from ever initiating anything remotely personal with him. The contract had become a kind of dark legend whispered in business circles. But she had assumed, no, trusted, that it only applied to full-time employees. Not her. Not a consultant, not someone brought in strictly for intellectual contribution. "He wants me to sign this?" she said, almost laughing in disbelief. "This is insulting." Her assistant cleared her throat. "It is Elisa Holdings, the biggest contract we've been offered since the firm started." "I know," Sierra snapped, pacing. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. She wanted this job. She'd been thrilled when they approached her. This was the opportunity her company had been built for. Real leverage, real exposure, a chance to operate on a scale she'd only dreamed of. But this contract? This assumption? As if she would ever be so unprofessional, as if she would ever need to be warned. She clenched her jaw. "Oh, he and I," she muttered, "are going to have words." On the morning of her first meeting with Elisa Holdings, Sierra stood in front of the mirror, fastening the last button of her crisp white silk blouse. Her father watched her from his wheelchair by the doorway, his brows drawn with worry, fingers tapping restlessly against the armrest. "You look like you're preparing for war," he murmured. She slipped into her tailored gray two-piece suit, smoothing the lapel with calm, precise movements. "Maybe I am." His voice lowered with concern. "Are you sure you shouldn't just let that contract go? Forget the whole thing?" She turned immediately, shaking her head with a firmness that left no room for argument. "No, Daddy. If I want this deal, if I want this future, I have to face him head on." A sigh escaped him. He loved her fiercely, but moments like this made guilt nip at his chest. Maybe I raised her too strictly, he thought. Maybe a woman shouldn't have to be this strong. But then he remembered all they had endured, the struggles, the nights she worked while he lay helpless, unable to do more than watch his brilliant daughter claw their lives back from the brink. What she survived would have shattered a weaker heart. He looked at her now with pride so deep it tightened his throat. Sierra was breathtaking, almost unreal in her natural radiance. Tall, at least 6 feet, a presence that filled a room even before she spoke. Her figure was full and softly sculpted, amply endowed in all the places nature endowed only its most generous creations. Not skinny, not big, just woman, elegant, powerful, perfectly balanced. Her face was arresting, sculpted cheekbones, an aristocratic jawline, and full lips that held more quiet strength than softness. Her skin glowed in its natural tone, rich and flawless. Thick lashes framed eyes that burned with intelligence, and a fire that even life's hardest blows hadn't dimmed. And she wore no makeup, none. She didn't need it. She looked like a model if models were allowed to look like real, beautiful, dimensional women. Her father swallowed hard. Just be careful. She knelt, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Always." At Olisa Holdings, she walked through the glass doors with the posture of a queen entering foreign territory. Her heels clicked sharply, commanding attention even though she didn't seek it. First stop, human resources. Without a tremor in her hand, she placed the signed copy of the Meije contract, the document that had infuriated her for days, on the HR director's polished desk. No smile, no small talk, just efficiency. Then she turned and headed upstairs toward the executive floor, toward Meije Olisa's office, toward the man whose rules she had agreed to follow, but whose authority she fully intended to challenge. Meije barely looked up when the knock sounded at his office door. He assumed it was HR or some assistant delivering another set of endless reports. And then he looked. Confusion struck first. The woman standing in the doorway moved like she owned the space, like the polished office and its imposing skyline existed solely to frame her presence. She was tall, statuesque, at least 6 feet, a presence that filled a room even before she spoke. Her figure was full and softly sculpted, amply endowed in all the places nature endowed only its most generous creations. Not skinny, not big, just woman, elegant, powerful, perfectly balanced. Her face was arresting, sculpted cheekbones, an aristocratic jawline, and full lips that held more quiet strength than softness. Her skin glowed in its natural tone, rich and flawless. Thick lashes framed eyes that burned with intelligence, and a fire that even life's hardest blows hadn't dimmed. And she wore no makeup, none. She didn't need it. She looked like a model if models were allowed to look like real, beautiful, dimensional women. Her father swallowed hard. Just be careful. She knelt, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Always." And then she spoke. "Mr. Olisa, I'm Sierra Nduka." Her voice rolled out like velvet over steel, sultry, almost sensual, yet formal, cutting through the space with authority rather than softness. "I've reviewed your projections and prepared a series of strategies I believe will maximize Olisa Holdings' reach in both local and international markets. If you'll allow me, I'll go through each point and suggest adjustments to current assumptions." She didn't smile. She didn't flutter her eyes. She didn't stand there and try to charm him. She was all business. Every inch of her attention was laser-focused on the task at hand, not him. Meije groaned again, this time audibly. Hours passed, or it felt like hours. They went line by line, assumption by assumption, and every single time Sierra challenged him, corrected him, forced him to see angles he had missed, loopholes he had ignored, opportunities he had assumed impossible. By the end of the first meeting, he was completely gobsmacked. She had outlined strategies he'd never even conceived. She had countered him 3 times with elegant precision, and she intended to personally oversee the implementation. He sat back, stunned, struggling to reconcile the storm of attraction and respect coursing through him. She hadn't looked at him like other women did, hadn't allowed herself to ogle him, hadn't tried to seduce. She had ignored the rules of his world, all the unwritten ways women typically responded to him, and yet it made his pulse race in ways nothing else ever had. Sierra stood, straightened her blazer, and asked crisply, "May I know where my office will be during my time here?" For the first time in his life, Meije felt a peculiar, dizzying pang of longing. He wanted a woman to look at him like he existed, like she wanted him, and yet she didn't. She hadn't. And that stunned him even more than her brilliance. He leaned back in his chair, dazed, and thought, God, I'm wildly attracted to her, and he had no idea how he was going to deal with it. The first day Sierra arrived at Olisa Holdings was only the beginning. Over the first week, May watched her move through his world with effortless authority. She arrived before sunrise, reviewing financial reports while he sipped his coffee in his office, and left long after the rest of the team had gone home. Every session was intense, every suggestion precise, every counterpoint sharp enough to make him pause. She didn't glance at him once in a flirtatious way, didn't soften her words to cater to his ego, and certainly didn't try to charm him. And yet, she had him, completely. During those early days, he reminded himself constantly of the May contract. She couldn't want him. He couldn't want her. He repeated it in his mind like a mantra, yet every time she leaned over a spreadsheet correcting an assumption he had been certain of, every time her hand brushed his over a chart, every time her deep, sultry voice cut across his office like silk and steel, his control slipped. By the second week, the sessions had evolved. What began as purely strategic discussions turned into late-night debates over investment opportunities, market shifts, and expansion plans. She challenged him relentlessly, dismantling arguments he had spent years perfecting, and in doing so, she earned his admiration and his obsession. He began noticing details he hadn't before: the natural curve of her neck as she tilted her head, the way her hair caught the office lights even when it was swept back in a bun, the subtle confidence in her stance when she presented her projections. He reminded himself again: contract, boundaries, rules.
2 months in, their collaboration had reached a rhythm. May depended on her insights more than he would ever admit, and she was beginning to leave her mark on Olisa Holdings in ways even he hadn't anticipated. She oversaw implementations personally, reviewed every deal, and corrected assumptions with surgical precision. Every project she touched began to thrive. Yet, despite the growing professional intimacy, there was no personal intimacy. She never flirted, she never laughed at him like other women had. She didn't even acknowledge the tension that hummed between them, leaving him frustrated and captivated in equal measure. By the 3rd month, it was unbearable. He found himself inventing reasons to interact with her, lingering in conference rooms when she had left her laptop, staying late to review reports she had already completed. Every glance in her direction made him acutely aware of his desire, a desire he could not act on, a desire forbidden by his own contract. And yet, he could not ignore it. It had been 3 months since the infamous first meeting, 3 months of strategy sessions, boardroom battles, and shared late-night coffees. 3 months of watching a woman who challenged him in every possible way, who made him feel alive and unsteady simultaneously. 3 months of reminding himself that the contract existed and failing every single day. Sierra remained unshakable, unflinching, brilliant, and utterly magnetic. May knew one truth: by the end of those 3 months, the May contract was no longer a safeguard. It was a temptation, a reminder of all the rules he was dying to break. Her father chuckled softly as Sierra gave her daily updates on May over dinner, shaking his head in admiration. "A man like him, most women would have melted weeks ago," he said. Sierra smiled tightly, recounting the progress she'd made in meetings, strategy sessions, and surviving May's relentless scrutiny. She spoke with poise, but her heart betrayed her. She was far more affected by him than she cared to admit. That evening, she dressed for a gala in Lagos with a care she hadn't taken in years. Her gown was downright provocative, a deep midnight blue that hugged every curve, slit daringly up her leg, and a neckline that left little to the imagination. She wore her hair in loose waves cascading over her shoulders, her makeup accentuating her natural beauty, bold enough for the high-profile event. Every detail was calculated to turn heads. Liza, her best friend turned sister, caught her in the mirror and arched a knowing brow. "Sierra," she said, frowning, You like him. It's obvious in your look tonight." She laughed nervously. "I'm attracted to him, yes," she admitted, her voice low. "He's brilliant, attractive, everything. But I don't like him. There's a difference." Liza smirked. "No, there isn't." Sierra's lips pressed into a thin line. Liza was right. From the first meeting, she had been drawn to Meije. His mind, his presence, the way he commanded any room he entered. She had fought hard to maintain professionalism, but it was more difficult than she had anticipated, especially when she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite her resolve. The gala was to host a visiting Saudi prince, known for his love of beautiful, high-profile women. Sierra's plan was simple: charm him, flirt enough to secure the necessary connections for Olisa Holdings, and maintain her professional edge. When she had mentioned this plan to Meije earlier, he had raised a skeptical brow. "You won't be able to pull it off," he said, that crooked, teasing smile on his face. Sierra had bristled. "I can," she had thought, and tonight, in that daring, cleavage-revealing gown, she intended to prove him wrong, without letting him see just how much she was already under his spell. As she adjusted the hem of her dress one last time and slipped her heels on, she took a deep breath. Lagos's glittering skyline awaited, filled with celebrities, business moguls, and high-stakes power players. And in the middle of it all, her most dangerous distraction, Meije Olisa, would be watching. The gala at the Elysium, Lagos's most exclusive hotel, shimmered with opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripped like frozen waterfalls, gilded moldings glinted in the soft light, and marble floors reflected every sparkle of jewelry, gown, and polished shoe. Guests in couture and tuxedos moved like actors on a stage, the hum of conversation and laughter rising like music in the grand ballroom. Meije had seen countless beautiful women in his life, models, socialites, heiresses, but none of them had ever stopped him in his tracks. Until she walked in. Sierra. She emerged from the shadows of the grand staircase like a goddess descended for a purpose all her own. Her hair, now cascading in loose waves over her shoulders, caught the light like liquid gold. Her makeup accentuated every striking feature: high cheekbones, full lips, eyes that burned with intelligence and fire. And the gown, it was downright provocative. Midnight blue silk hugging every curve, a daring slit that revealed her long, sculpted leg, and a neckline plunging just enough to hint at the fullness of her chest. She was impossibly tall, impossibly elegant, and impossibly him. Meije froze. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared. He barely recognized her. This wasn't the professional, buttoned-up consultant who had dominated his office meetings for months. This was a vision designed to ignite desire, and it worked. His body betrayed him instantly. He felt a hard, undeniable arousal pressing against his tailored trousers, a physical reaction he hadn't experienced in years, not this raw, unrestrained, dangerous. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled involuntarily on the arms of his chair. And then she moved, laughing lightly at something the prince said, the silk of her gown brushing against her thigh as she stepped, the subtle sway of her hips mesmerizing. Every move she made was deliberate, magnetic, intoxicating. Meije's breathing became uneven, and he realized, with a shock he tried to suppress, that he had never wanted a woman this badly in his life. He swore under his breath, standing abruptly as the event neared its finale, refusing to let anyone else get between him and the woman who had already claimed his attention. Later, in the Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, on the drive back through Lagos's glittering streets, silence stretched between them until Meije could no longer contain it. "Do you realize what you just did to me tonight?" he demanded, voice low, strained with barely controlled hunger. Sierra looked calm, composed, but the tiniest spark in her eyes betrayed amusement. "I executed the plan," she said, "and I succeeded." "You succeeded?" he growled, leaning across, his hand brushing the silk of her thigh in a heat-filled, possessive touch.
Her lips parted slightly, a whisper of breathless amusement escaping. "It was part of the strategy," she said, voice low and smooth. "You said it yourself. The prince enjoys attention. I ensured he got exactly what he wanted without compromising Olisa Holdings." Mijay groaned, a sound somewhere between frustration and raw desire. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. His body ached for hers. Before he could stop himself, he bent down, pressed his lips to hers, and kissed her with the force of all the weeks of suppressed tension between them. It was intimate, heated, and consuming, tongues brushing, breaths mingling, bodies pressing close. His hand slid over the curve of her hip, pulling her impossibly closer, while the other rested against the seat for support. She gasped into the kiss, surprised yet responding with a hunger he hadn't anticipated. When they finally broke apart, both panting, foreheads pressed together, he whispered, voice hoarse, "God, I've wanted this. I've wanted you since the first day you walked into my office." Sierra's own pulse raced. She had tried to fight it, tried to stay professional, tried to maintain the barrier imposed by the Mijay contract, but in that instant, in the quiet of the car, with the city lights of Lagos streaking past, it no longer mattered. Desire had taken over, and Mijay Olisa, Africa's most eligible and controlled playboy, was completely undone. Sierra stepped out of the sleek Rolls-Royce, her heels clicking against the pavement. She turned sharply to face him, eyes blazing. "That kiss was a mistake," she said, voice trembling with suppressed emotion, but firm. "It shouldn't have happened, and it will never happen again." Mijay stayed in the car a heartbeat, his gaze locked on hers, heat radiating from his body like a live wire. "A mistake?" he echoed, voice low, raw, and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you just did to me tonight?" Sierra squared her shoulders. "I do, and we both know we can't. This can't happen. Not now, not here." He pushed the car door open, his movement fluid, deliberate. The air between them crackled. He stepped closer, hands brushing her waist, then sliding lower, stroking her thighs with a touch that left her knees weak. His gaze lingered on hers, dark and hungry, as his other hand found her chest, cupping her over the silk of her gown, the fabric warm beneath his palm. Sierra gasped sharply, stepping back instinctively, her back hitting the cool night air. "Mijay, stop! This isn't right."
"I won't stop," he said, voice hoarse, brushing his lips dangerously close to hers. "Not when I've wanted you like this from the moment I met you." She shook her head, panic and desire warring in her chest. I will honor the contract. I will. And I can't." Before he could respond, she twisted away from him and sprinted toward her house. The night swallowed her, the heels of her stilettos clicking urgently against the driveway. She slammed the door behind her, heart racing, chest heaving, trembling from the intensity of the moment. Mijay stood frozen in the driveway, the night air suddenly sharp and empty around him. Frustration coiled in his chest like a living thing. He could still feel the warmth of her body, the memory of her curves pressed against him, the soft gasp she had tried to smother. He growled low, a mixture of fury and desire. "Damn it," he thought. "She's running from me, and I want her more than I've ever wanted anything in my life." The mansion was silent behind the locked doors, but outside, Mijay's pulse was alive with fire. Tonight had changed everything, and he knew it. Sierra awoke from a fitful sleep, her mind tangled in the events of the gala. She could still feel the heat of Mijay's lips on hers, the way his kiss had stolen her breath and left her pulse racing. Her body remembered what her mind tried to suppress, and every thought of him made her cheeks flush anew. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She reached for it, still groggy, and read the message. "Dinner at my place tonight. Prince Hakeem leaves for Dubai at midnight. We need to seal the deal." Short, precise, commanding, and unmistakably him. Sierra read the message over and over, her stomach fluttering at the thought of seeing him again. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Professionalism would be her shield tonight. No distractions. Focus. When evening came, she dressed with care. Her gown was modest but undeniably elegant, a rich red fabric that draped perfectly over her curves, spaghetti straps highlighting her shoulders, and a demure neckline that suggested sophistication rather than seduction. She pulled her hair into a sleek ponytail, keeping the focus on her face and the determined glint in her eyes. When she arrived at Meje's residence, she was stunned. The driveway alone was lined with sculpted hedges and fountains that gleamed under soft, strategically placed lighting. The massive front doors, carved from dark mahogany, seemed to promise secrets within. Stepping inside, her breath caught. The interior was palatial in its grandeur, high ceilings adorned with gilded moldings, crystal chandeliers that scattered light like 1,000 diamonds, and floors of polished marble that reflected the glow of recessed lighting. An enormous staircase curved upward, its railings intricately wrought in gold leaf. Walls were lined with priceless artworks, each piece carefully chosen to speak of culture, taste, and immense wealth. Plush furniture, silk drapes, and decorative accents completed the scene, giving the impression of a home that was both luxurious and lived in, yet untouchable in its perfection. Sierra's eyes widened as she took it all in, feeling both awe and a flicker of intimidation. And somewhere in the pit of her stomach, excitement stirred. She reminded herself, focus on the deal, professionalism, control. But as the sound of footsteps approached, measured and confident, her resolve wavered. She knew exactly who was coming. Chidumeje Olisa. Meje opened the door and welcomed her in. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes caught the dining table set for two, candles flickering softly, casting a warm glow over the polished wood. She glanced to him, questioning. He gave a small, almost sheepish smile. Prince Hakim was here, he admitted. He came by earlier, but he left about an hour ago. She didn't speak, simply raising a brow, and he took a slow step toward her, his gaze drinking her in. She froze, caught off guard by the intensity of his look. "You look breathtaking tonight," he murmured, his voice low, reverent. "Every time I see you, Sierra, I try to fight it. Believe me, I've tried. The Meje contract, it's been my shield. I've told myself it's enough to hold me back, to stay rational, to protect both of us." He moved closer, the air between them thickening with unspoken tension. "I can't," he admitted, his thumb brushing lightly over her hand. "Not when you walk in dressed like this, commanding every room without even knowing it. Not when your laugh, your voice, it stays with me long after you've gone. I've tried to deny it, tried to bury it under rules and obligations." She swallowed, unsure how to respond, as his gaze swept over her again, lingering on the curve of her jaw, the sweep of her hair, the way her eyes seemed to hold a world of unspoken thoughts. "I know the contract," he said, pulling something from beside the sofa, "and I know the forfeit it demands if I break it, and I'm willing to pay it, whatever it costs."
Before she could react, he opened a sleek leather folder, revealing sheaves of paper, the Meje contract, meticulously written. With a swift motion, he tossed them into the fireplace. Flames licked the edges, consuming the agreement in a shower of sparks and smoke. Sierra's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth. "Meje, what are you—" He stepped closer, letting the heat of the fire wash over both of them, closing the distance until she could feel the steady beat of his heart against hers. "I love you," he said, his voice steady, unwavering, carrying every ounce of sincerity he had ever tried to hide. "I don't just desire you. I can't just desire you. You're the only woman who challenges me, who matches me in every way. You stand up to me, you keep me grounded, and you—" He paused, letting a faint smile tug at his lips. "You attract me without even trying." He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering at her jaw. "I don't want to hide how I feel anymore. Not from you, not from anyone. I love you, Sierra, completely. And I don't care about the rules, the contracts. Nothing matters if I can't be honest with you."
Her breath caught, heart racing, shock and disbelief warring with something warmer, deeper. She opened her mouth, but words failed her. He leaned in, closer still, eyes never leaving hers, letting the flames of the fireplace mirror the fire between them. Sierra's breath hitched at his bold statement, the unexpected tenderness of his gaze dissolving the professional distance she had worked so hard to maintain. She knew intellectually what she should say, a sharp retort about professionalism, a reminder of the merger, a frantic attempt to rewind the conversation to spreadsheets and strategy. "Meje, this is a mistake," she started, the words coming out as a shady whisper rather than the firm decree she intended. We have a deal to focus on, and this," she gestured vaguely between them, "is too much, too fast." He didn't argue, he didn't even speak. Instead, he just swooped. One hand cupped her jaw, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her cheekbone, grounding her. His eyes, a deep, molten brown, were heavy with a singular focus that brooked no resistance. Then his lips claimed hers. This wasn't the fleeting, breathless surprise of the gala. This was a slow, deliberate demolition of her defenses, escalating rapidly into a frantic, demanding collision. The kiss was intense, tasting faintly of the wine he must have had with the prince, and purely, undeniably Meje. His lips were firm, warm, and expertly persuasive, moving against hers with a rhythm that stole the air from her lungs and sent a dizzying, immediate heat rushing through her veins. He didn't ask, he simply took, inhabiting the moment, and demanding a response that her body was already desperate to give. She melted into him, the careful ponytail feeling heavy, the red dress no longer a suit of armor, but a silken burden that needed to be shed. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, their shared breath was ragged. His voice was a raw, low plea, close enough to vibrate against her skin. "Let me make love to you, Sierra." The vulnerability in that whisper, that rare, genuine crack in his formidable armor, was what finally demolished her last remaining defense. It wasn't an order, it was a desperate request from a man who had momentarily lost his formidable control. She didn't trust her voice, so she simply closed her eyes and offered a silent, trembling nod. The formal setting of the palatial drawing room became irrelevant. Clothes were quickly, impatiently discarded, the classy red silk ripped away, the perfectly tailored suit jacket tossed haphazardly. They sank back onto the luxurious leather sofa, the intense, sudden urgency overriding all pretense of propriety. They made love intensely, violently, a fierce, hungry joining that was less about slow romance and more about the explosive release of weeks of pent-up tension, mutual attraction, and shared ambition. Meje was dominant, taking what she offered with a demanding rhythm that pushed them both to the edge. Sierra met his intensity with her own desperate need, digging her fingers into his shoulders, gasping his name as the physical reality of their connection overwhelmed the opulent surroundings. It was raw, powerful, and utterly consuming, a desperate, elemental affirmation of the connection that had sparked between them the moment they met, culminating in a simultaneous, shuddering climax that left them both breathless and utterly spent. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, their breathing slowing back to normal, Meje pressed a lingering kiss to her temple. He looked around the drawing room, at the discarded clothing, the slightly askew cushions, the utterly unsuitable setting. A sheepish, boyish smile touched his lips. "Sierra," he murmured, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, "I apologize. I was not in control enough to make love to you in a proper bed." Sierra shifted slightly, brushing her fingers across his chest. "It was perfect," she whispered, the intensity of what they shared still vibrating between them, and for the first time in a long while, both of them allowed themselves to simply exist. After dinner, Sierra stood, gathering her things. "I should go home," she said softly, her voice tinged with reluctance. "Stay the night, please," he whispered, his voice hoarse, thick with emotion. Sierra froze, surprised at the barely concealed longing in his eyes. She tried to steady herself, the memory of their earlier closeness still clinging to her. "Seeing that I wasn't supposed to look at you
lustfully, she said, referencing the old contract, and no loopholes.
Lust all you want, he murmured, his gaze dark and earnest. There's one loophole, he whispered, stepping closer, his hand cupping her face. You. And before he could speak, he captured her lips in a kiss that left them both breathless. He laughed softly, a deep, throaty sound that vibrated in his chest, and scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. Carrying her through the softly lit apartment, his presence enveloped her, warm and protective, until they reached his bedroom, a sanctuary of soft linens and muted candlelight, where the air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Once inside, they sank into the embrace they had both been holding back all evening, bodies pressed close, hearts racing. Every touch, every whispered word, every soft laugh and lingering glance spoke of desire, trust, and the deep bond growing between them. They moved together in a dance of closeness, sharing a night of tender intimacy, laughter, and whispered confessions that left them both breathless, yet utterly fulfilled. Later, they lay entwined, the soft glow of the candles reflecting in their eyes. Meje brushed her hair back, murmuring, "I never want to let you go." Sierra pressed closer, letting the warmth of the night and of him wash over her. The next morning, Sierra woke early, the events of the previous night clinging to her like a second skin. She moved about absent-mindedly, brushing her teeth, tying her hair, replaying every look, every word. Meje didn't do forever. That truth sat heavy in her chest. "Marry me?" The words hit her back. She whirled around so fast she nearly collided with him. Meje stood in the doorway, barefoot, sleep-rumpled, a soft smile playing on his lips, as though he hadn't just dropped a life-altering question into the room. She blinked, then laughed. "You don't do forever," she said lightly, folding her arms as if that could steady her racing heart. Meje's smile faded, replaced with something earnest, almost vulnerable. "I didn't," he corrected quietly. "Until you." Sierra tilted her head, unconvinced. "That's a beautiful line, very convincing, still not you." He stepped closer. "I know my reputation, Sierra. I've spent years running from anything permanent, but loving you ruined that for me." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You make me want roots, mornings, arguments about paint colors, growing old." She searched his face, looking for the joke, the escape hatch. "You're serious?" "I'm never been more serious." She pulled her hand back gently. "Then where's the ring?" He paused. Just for a second, her brow arched immediately. "Exactly." Meje chuckled, shaking his head. "I didn't want to pick one without you. I don't want a ring you tolerate. I want one you love." She scoffed softly. "So this was a trial proposal?" "No," he said, stepping closer again. "This is me asking you to come choose forever with me." Silence stretched between them. "You're really doing this," she murmured. "I'm really doing this." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "I should say no." "But you won't," he said gently. Her lips twitched despite herself. "You're very confident for a man without a ring." He grinned, eyes lighting up. "Then let's fix that." An hour later, Sierra found herself seated beside him in the back of his car, fingers laced with his as the city blurred past the windows. "Ring shopping," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I woke up expecting coffee and confusion." "And you're getting diamonds and clarity," he replied. "I'm improving already." She glanced at him, her skepticism softening. "You know this means forever, right?" He squeezed her hand. "I know, and for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of it." She smiled then, slow, real, hopeful. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's go find my ring." The boutique glowed with soft light and quiet luxury, glass cases shimmering with endless possibilities. Meje held the door open for her, his hand warm at the small of her back, as though guiding her into a future already unfolding. "Anything you want," he said simply. "Don't hold back." And she didn't. She tried on rings with laughing disbelief, delicate bands, bold solitaires, vintage cuts that whispered of eras past. Each time she hesitated, Mege leaned closer, eyes bright with amusement and devotion. "If you love it, it's yours," he said without hesitation. "But this one is outrageous," she teased, lifting her hand to catch the light. "So are you," he replied without hesitation. The attendant smiled knowingly and stepped away, leaving them in their own quiet bubble. Sierra stared at her reflection, her hand trembling as a diamond settled perfectly against her finger. It fit, not just in size, but in meaning, in promise. Her breath caught. Mege noticed immediately. "Hey," he murmured, turning her gently towards him. "What is it?" Tears shimmered in her eyes, unbidden, unstoppable. "I've spent so long guarding my heart, I didn't realize how heavy that armor was until you took it off without breaking me." He rested his forehead against hers. "You're safe with me." She nodded, a tear escaped despite her smile. "I know, that's why this matters." He paid without blinking, as though no cost could compare to the way she looked at him, open, certain, loved. Outside, the world felt different, softer, brighter. Sierra slipped her fingers into his, the ring catching the sun, her heart full to the brim. "I love you," she said simply. Mege squeezed her hand. "And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve you." She smiled through her tears, knowing, deep in her bones, that she loved and was loved completely and without fear. If this story stirred something in you, if you smiled, sighed, or believed in love a little more, don't keep it to yourself. Tap like to let us know it reached your heart. Share it with someone who still believes in forever. And subscribe so you never miss another moment of passion, promise, and beautifully told love. It's completely free, and your support helps keep these stories flowing.